Trust me, there's nothing that hadn't happened before. Can't remember.
Good morning. I know we are still having others join us, but I did want to welcome you to the Employer Virtual Training Series, and we'll get started in about 5 minutes. So grab your coffee or your water, and we'll get started here in just a moment. Thanks. Well, good morning and welcome. This is Beth Butler Fatal, Executive Director of Disability in North Carolina. I want to welcome you to our fourth and final Employer Virtual Training Series webinar. We're glad you're with us. And just as a reminder, we are offering these virtual trainings on our website. So we will be posting those after today's by September 1st. So you can go back and review what you've learned and again, encourage others to visit our website to take advantage of this training series. But as I said, my name is Beth Butler, and I have the privilege of serving as Executive Director of Disability in North Carolina. And with me today is Pat Kuehl, my Operations Director. Pat, you might be on mute. And then we've got Barton Cutter, our Communication Specialist. Barton, are you with us?
I am. I'm wrong. I'm the communication specialist at the agency. Before we begin today, I want to let everyone know that if you have trouble understanding me, please feel free to let us know in the chat, and I will repeat myself.
Great. Thank you, Barton.
And good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I had a little technical difficulty, but I'm back.
Great. Good morning, Pat. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Pat Kuehl, Operations Director. I'm very excited about today's webinar, and I hope that you folks get a lot out of this content.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and just remind folks as well, there will be a Q&A session following today's session. So if you have questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to drop those in the chat box. And we also want to encourage you to engage with each other. That's how we learn from these experiences. So please, if you have comments or things to add in the chat box, please feel free to do that as well. And as I said, these webinars will be made available to you following today's presentation. So we encourage you to share them with colleagues that perhaps couldn't come and join today, but use this information to, again, help to inform your work going forward. So with that, Disability in North Carolina was founded in 2012. For those that are not familiar with our organization, we are a business-to-business network, really committed to disability employment inclusion. Our mission is to empower businesses to achieve disability inclusion and equality in the workforce, supply chain, and the marketplace. Disability in North Carolina is a proud affiliate of our national organization, Disability In, which is the leading nonprofit resource worldwide for businesses and disability inclusion. So that relationship really connects us with a huge partnership of corporations, 400 plus corporations, and again, connects us to a network of affiliates as well across the country. Our audience, our customers are really that business leader, human resource executives, the stakeholders within the corporate culture that can help to drive change and create employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities. So we're very excited that you're with us. Today's session is providing reasonable accommodations, and we're going to take a real deep dive into that. But first, I want to give a huge shout out to our self-advocate advisors that have truly been a big part of the content that you will see today. They've also met continually over the last 6 months to help inform the work that you're seeing today. So a huge shout out to them. And of course, thanks to the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities Without them and their support, we wouldn't be bringing you today's presentation. So again, strong partners in the state here, and thank you so much for their contribution. So let's get started. What is a reasonable accommodation? A reasonable accommodation is any change to an application or a hiring process, including an interview process. It could be a change or a modification to a job or the way a job is performed. It could also be that architectural piece, right, or a modification that may be needed in the workplace. The overall purpose of a reasonable accommodation, right, is to help the qualified individual with a disability perform the essential functions of the job. So that they can actively participate in our workforce. It is important to understand here as well, when we think about accommodations and the word reasonable, there's this idea as well that, a reasonable accommodation is what is expected. That doesn't necessarily mean that every accommodation that's requested is granted. So there are, under the ADA, right, if the reasonable accommodation provides an undue hardship to the employer, then that can be a reason to deny that accommodation. I will say that many companies today, especially the larger companies, are being proactive in this space, and they are actually taking dollars and setting those aside for what we call accommodation funds. And those are earmarked dollars specifically designed for assisting individuals with disabilities in accommodations when they're needed. So if you're a small business today and you're thinking about this work, it is a huge opportunity and an amazing statement of your commitment to this work by simply identifying a small fund dedicated to the types of accommodations that one might need. So other types of accommodations that are generally considered reasonable are changing job tasks, providing reserved parking. And again, sometimes that can be a challenge because depending on where your business is, you may not have control over those parking spaces. So again, each of these accommodation requests are evaluated, and you're going to hear this again today over and over, but each accommodation request is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So each is unique to the circumstances that, that the accommodation and that individual may need. Improving accessibility in the work area, so modifying a workspace or a desk, perhaps, changing the presentation or how a training is offered. Many times, employees are offered training opportunities that lead to promotional opportunities. So as employers, we want to make sure that accommodations are being made throughout the employee's experience with your organization as well. So those trainings and other presentations and the materials shared in those sessions need to be modified or accessible, right, to everybody. So providing or adjusting the environment, equipment, or software, allowing a flexible work schedule, that's certainly one that is probably most common. Especially, today we've got some that are individuals that are more likely to need a flexible work schedule. And what we've learned over the course of the last 2 years is that that's not always a difficult accommodation to grant. So other reasonable accommodations, providing alternative formats. And here's just some examples where a supervisor may give feedback, typically in writing, rather than verbally, so that an employee who communicates maybe better in writing can be given that feedback in writing. Service animals is a big one as well, being open to allowing individuals to have an accommodation that includes a service animal in the workplace. There are policies that are in place now. Many companies are drafting policies that, again, address the need and support for service animals in the workplace. Changing equipment. Again, an employer purchases software that allows for magnification of a computer screen, all types of accommodations. Reorganizing a job. We talked a lot about this last week too, in terms of the way a job is performed, particularly an individual with an intellectual or developmental disability. They may have peak times where they're more productive, or they have just a better opportunity to do a more tactile task, for example, later or earlier in the morning. So being mindful of just those simple modifications that can be very beneficial accommodations for an individual. And then we can talk about job reassignment, right? So a job reassignment is a reasonable accommodation and can be offered in the event that an employee either has a disability or acquires a disability and is no longer able to perform the essential functions of the job that they were hired into. Understanding that a reassignment does not necessarily mean a promotion, right? So it's a like or similar position that an individual is reassigned to. They have to be able to perform the essential functions of that job with or without an accommodation. And it may be a position that pays equal to or less than the position that they had previously as well. So again, the job that they are reassigned to, the pay mirrors that of the job that they are now performing. So that's something to keep in mind. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat, who is going to walk us through kind of a review of the job coach as an accommodation. Pat?
Thank you, Beth. So as we covered in the last webinar, a job coach can be considered a reasonable accommodation. Remembering that job coaches are training consultants who can assist the employee, particularly the employee with intellectual or developmental disabilities, to learn the job duties. They can work in partnership with the managerial and supervisory staff at the employer's location to create strategies for organizing the way tasks are performed, such that they get completed in a timely, efficient, and effective manner. And they can assist the employee with an intellectual and developmental disabilities to acclimate to the workplace environment. Individuals who qualify for job coaching services will often be able to get those services provided by North Carolina Division of Vocational Rehabilitation or the managed care organization in your location under a mental health DD substance abuse agency that's qualified to do the job coaching. And an employer may be required to allow a job coach paid by one of these public or private social service agencies to accompany the employee at the job site as the reasonable accommodation. But again, this does not mean that the job coach is the only one that's training and supervising and supporting the individual. At its best, job coaching should be a consultative experience, not one where the job coach replaces existing managers and staff, because otherwise that employee is not going to be learning from and accepting direction from their employer. So we also talked last week extensively about customized employment, and you may be asking, gee, you know, the customized employment seemed a little bit more complex and a little bit more like a stretch away from what the ADA actually states as requirements. So I want to be honest with you. The ADA does not require that an employer use the customized employment strategies. However, customized employment can be very beneficial, not just to the employee that's receiving those services, but also to the employer, who can often find that via task reassignment or taking a different look at the job description, maybe creating some different avenues by carving out some tasks that that person with IDD could perform, they may find that it actually offers the business efficiencies and improves their productivity. Likewise, job sharing. There's nothing that requires an employer to split the shift between two assigned individuals who are performing the essential functions of that job. But employers often find that if they want to keep hold of one employee, they might want to acquiesce and figure out a new way to job share so that they can maintain individuals in a particular position for the benefit of the company. And then a light touch down here that I want to remind you, self-employment is also considered a customized employment approach. Of course, self-employment would probably offer the maximum opportunity for an individual to customize their work schedule, etc. But just letting you know this, employers would be looking at task reassignment, job carving, job creation, and ways to restructure job descriptions under customized employment. So now I'm going to turn it back to Barton.
Thank you. So the possibility is that every accommodation is unique and can be adapted based on the unique relationship between the employee and the employer. The first step in this is just disclosure, because unless the person with a disability discloses the need, the employer has no responsibility to address the accommodation if it is not asked for. So the process has to be interactive, has to be ongoing very often. So because this is we're human and our needs shift over time. So let's hear more about the accommodation from Dana, who brings a lot of experience.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Barton.
Going,
Okay. Are you ready for it now?
yeah.
All right.
Accommodation does not have to be a physical accommodation. I feel like that's what a lot of people assume when it comes to the word reasonable accommodation, but it can be many other things. It's support using. It's like not just the desk. It can be like anything of that time schedule changes. Anything of that can be considered a reasonable accommodation. But with that, I know many employers think of it as, oh, we'll just change the desk, or oh, we'll just move this object. We'll give you a cleaner, bigger office space. But that's not really it, because we're trying to support success and accommodations. We're trying to support success in the workforce, so accommodation can mean anything, and basically it means to take new possibilities, learning, and approaches. So it's all about changing everything within the work environment, not just changing what work environment they're in. basically every
Right. So let's remember that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are all unique. They're not all alike. And since everyone is a unique individual, they will have their own personalities, their own strengths, their own weaknesses, their own likes and dislikes, their own hopes and dreams, and their own needs in the workplace. Another thing we want to remind you about is that about 85% of people with intellectual disabilities really only have situational challenges, which is to say, you know, conducting themselves as a citizen in the world is pretty seamless. The situational challenges will occur if the individual is confronted with issues where their disability becomes evident. And that can sometimes be in academic tasks or multitasking and things of that nature. But most people with intellectual developmental disabilities actually live fairly independently. Many marry, many become educated in inclusive school programs, not exclusive or segregated programs, and many can go straight to work, which is great. The other thing we want to remind you about is people with developmental disabilities do not always have to have an intellectual impairment to fall under this category. Some have exclusively a physical impairment that puts them in the category of IDD due to the fact that it occurred during the developmental phase. Now, the next thing we're going to turn to is a discussion of some composite experiences.
Great. And Barton?
So, just as best, sorry, just as to everyone has unique abilities and unique areas of strength and weaknesses. So, those businesses that are ranked among the best places to work for disability inclusion are those businesses that know how to leverage the talent of those with disabilities. So, let's so here's probably one of the best explanation of unique ability that I've ever heard. So, yeah,
I think a helpful way of understanding mental health challenges is through the lens of the social model for disability. So what this point of view says is that everyone is different, and part of that means that every single person has a unique mind-body combination that no one else has, and that we do our best to respect those differences across the whole spread of humanity. That we really embrace diversity as a natural part of being human. So this notion also looks at disability as being caused by a society, right, that doesn't really accommodate and include everyone the way we should. But as we work to accommodate disabilities and include everyone, we not only get access to the widest range of human experience and human creativity, which can be very beneficial, right, in the business community, people who maybe think differently or have new ideas. But I think also as we learn to embrace this idea, then we're also helping to sort of heal our world, and it's a net positive for everyone.
Wow, so much wisdom there. And again, the contribution that our self-advocates have made to this work, you have been able to benefit from. So I am so grateful for that. So thank you so much, Jade. So the neurodiversity and IDD space, when we think about, sometimes refer to it as the superpowers, right? So, you know, there are different types of accommodations that one with neurodiversity or IDD may need, such as the need for, well, let me back up. Let's talk about the unique abilities, right, of one with neurodiversity or IDD, and that's they're often very good at analytics. Maybe they have high skills in math and or in IT or the software development space. They may hold multiple degrees, and they've got a great work ethic. So how can an employer approach plugging in those skill sets to the jobs and the opportunities that they have in their organization? Something simple as noise canceling headphones are often a great addition, allowing to just kind of minimize those outside distractions, particularly in workplaces now that are often open, where you've got a number of different activities happening in one space. Those headphones can be a simple and inexpensive way to accommodate an individual. Coworkers know that maybe he doesn't feel comfortable or she does not feel comfortable making eye contact or with or during long conversations. And so, you know, mitigating and minimizing the way that you interact with that individual, and being okay with the fact that a person may or may not make eye contact with you, and just understanding that as an accommodation. And then finally, just when giving instructions, if you are supervising or managing someone with neurodiversity or IDD, being sure that you are being very clear on the directions that you're giving them, and that perhaps you write them down, you make them simple in terms of the steps that you want performed. If the series in those steps is important, ensuring that you are communicating that. So again, being more definitive in your instructions is often very, very helpful in this situation. And now we will hear from Niles, another self-advocate.
I have 2 master's degrees, a master's in history and a master's in library and information sciences, and I'm seeking full-time employment in the historical or library fields as a research historian, reference librarian, archivist, collections curator, or museum educator. And some of my strengths include strong organizational research and analytical skills, strong detail orientation. I have a passionate customer service orientation, and I enjoy engagement with the public. I'm very good at multitasking and handling projects in a time-efficient manner. And I'm very passionate about subject of history as well as the field of librarianship. And I've had extensive experience working in both fields as a volunteer and as a research intern at various libraries and museums and historic sites. And so I'm hoping that I'll find a full-time position in one of these fields that will be pertinent to either of my master's degrees, and which will enable me to utilize my skills to their fullest.
Thanks. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pat to talk to us about ADHD and DD.
Thank you, Beth. Wow, hard to believe that Niles is unemployed at the present moment. I'm hoping anybody who's out there listening and has an idea about a position that he might apply for can reach out to us because he's eminently qualified. All right, now as we have been talking about composite situations to give you an illustration of how an employer might accommodate an individual request, let's touch down on individuals with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or the so-called ADHD, IDD phenomena. So the superpowers among some of these individuals, not necessarily all, but some, might be to be highly creative and to be the person that thinks outside of the box. Another superpower can often be the ability to identify pattern recognition very quickly. I have a family member who is on this spectrum, and he is a whiz at doing computer coding, in part because he can read errors in code very quickly. And don't ever let him challenge you to a match of finding 4-leaf clovers, because I've seen him pick out 15 or 20 4-leaf clovers in a matter of under 2 minutes while I was still looking around going, what are we looking for? So that pattern recognition can be a huge superpower among individuals with ADHD. The ability to jump from one project to another can, on the one hand, be a deficit, but on the other, it can be quite a helpful skill, depending upon whether or not you've been assigned multiple things to do. Often individuals with ADHD bring enthusiasm and energy to the job, and they can usually tell you some of the strategies they've used to help refocus themselves. So again, some of the things you might consider as an accommodation would be a dedicated office space, or a dedicated work area where that individual can minimize distractions. Using digital reminders as a managerial prompt to prioritize certain tasks and meet deadlines as appropriate would be another suggestion. Maybe have more than one project assigned for this individual so that they can minimize the boredom factor that can occur when you have ADHD and you're very, very creative and very mentally ahead of where you need to be in terms of staying up with your tasks. And then the benefit of exercise breaks can often help individuals with ADHD to reorder and come back and be more productive. Just a composite and some ideas to share that may be helpful to you. So now I am going to turn it back for Jade to give us some accommodation ideas around mental health conditions.
So you might be thinking, how can I best accommodate my employee with a mental illness? What are some things we can do to help bring these people into our workforce and to appreciate them and to make sure that they can take care of themselves? And the thing I want to talk about is flexibility in scheduling. People who have chronic mental illness are much more likely to also have sleep issues or sleep disorders. I know I do. And we're also likely to be taking medications that can be sedating. And because of these two things, we might also have less typical schedules or cycles of when we're at our best and most awake and productive. So I think if this is the case for one of your employees, you know, for example, rather than getting mad that they consistently miss a certain meeting at a certain time or something, that you might want to consider looking at being flexible about when they work, the hours they work, and or could some work at home options maybe work for them, so that they are the most able to take care of themselves, take their medication, sleep, and be productive when they're at work. And then likewise, I also wanted to mention that some people may have difficulties in a certain season, or someone, for example, with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, might have difficulty around the date of a specific triggering event. And some people, for example, have seasonal depression that is worse in the winter. So looking at some of those things, and getting creative with the person, and seeing if there's a way you can work within those limitations, can be really important. And I think also, as the person receiving the accommodations, they can be really, really appreciated. Because I think ultimately we all want to do our best work, and sometimes we just need a chance, and that chance can mean getting creative, and you know, don't be afraid to try new things.
So once again, as we're winding through our composite examples here, we're going to talk about an individual that might have Down syndrome or more typical intellectual and developmental disability. So in this case, the superpowers might be being very friendly, kind to everyone, very social, very serious about getting a job done, able to learn complex tasks, but is motivated when those tasks are routine and fixed. So I think about the individuals that I have seen working in hospital surgical toolkit assembly, where the toolkits have, you know, as many as 30 or 40 different items that have to be placed in the toolkit for the surgeon, but it has to be done flawlessly, the same every single time without missing any of the tools. And I've seen some individuals with Down syndrome who were really superb at that particular job, and were tireless in repetitively doing a very complex task over and over again, right to specifications. And then I think it's important to understand that people with intellectual disabilities can be some of your most loyal and sustainable employees. That said, it is important to accommodate by having clear, concrete directions, sometimes providing directions as images or checklists, role-playing with that individual during the training, which is another thing that a job coach could help to facilitate. Providing some extra time to master these complex tasks, and providing digital or other types of reminders to prioritize tasks and meet deadlines. Just a few examples. This was not intended to be exhaustive. It was intended to be illustrative. And so now I'm going to turn it back to Beth.
Great, thank you, Pat. So here are just a few the guidelines in terms of reasonable accommodations, and again, a way for you to ask questions about where an individual has worked in the past, and or accommodations that may have worked in the past for them. if you become more and more familiar, again, with accommodation policies, whether it's at NC Works or in your own company or organization, and then developing partnerships. And here are just a few, right? With vocational rehabilitation, there's a number of agencies, the Division of Services for the Blind, Deaf and Hard of Hearing. There's a number of different resources that employers can leverage as they begin to or continue to work through these accommodations with their own organizations. And so here are just a few resources. The Job Accommodations Network, North Carolina Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and again, North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities are also available, as well as resources on our website at Disability in North Carolina, when we think about the toolkits and some of the resources that we have available, which will include the series of webinars through this Employer Virtual Forum series as well. So with that, I want to open it up for some questions, and here are just a few that we would love to hear from you in terms of some things that maybe you learned today about accommodations or ideas specific to neurodiversity or the IDD world, and ways that you might implement some of those accommodations. We may have prompted some questions as well that you have. Take
Yes,
this
Beth.
time. Yes.
We have a really great question, and
Yeah.
it's one that's going to stimulate a lot of conversation. And so the question is, what I'd like to know is what happens if employees are diagnosed with mental health or any other disability after being hired? How would they go about receiving a reasonable accommodation? And can a person be denied or even fired for needing an accommodation? A lot to unpack here.
That is a lot to unpack here. That's a great question. And I'm going to go ahead and jump on my response, and then I'd love to hear, Pat, what your thoughts are, and Barton and others. So yes, I mean, most often there is, individuals acquire disabilities at all points in their life. And many are acquired during an employment experience, right? So I'm hired and I don't make an accommodation request because I don't have a disability at that point. And so life happens, and one is acquired at some point during their employment experience. Depending, now I will say this, right, depending on the size of the employer. So ADA applies to employers that have 15 or more employees. What if that occurs, and there are a number of different policies that are at play here. One would be the leave of absence policy, right? If it requires that you be off work for a period of time. But there should be a return to work process associated with that as well. That should include a conversation around your return to work and what accommodations you might need and to make that return to work successful. At that point is when you could open up some conversation, as Barton was sharing. That interactive process is critically important. So again, communicating that to your employer, whether that's through an accommodations team, whether it's through the leaves and benefits team, but making sure you know what that policy is for that organization and engaging in that process to determine what your needs and have that conversation. Can you be fired because you've requested an accommodation, if that's the question? The answer is no, you can't be fired for requesting an accommodation. That's not appropriate. And so I think that, again, every case is unique. And so I want to emphasize that. what works for one individual in terms of an accommodation may not work for the next, and there are circumstances surrounding each. So I would just encourage one to be as open as they're comfortable with being in terms of their needs, and making those requests to those in the company that are responsible for engaging in this process with you. I don't know, Pat, do you have another thought, or Barton?
Right. So this opens up so many great topics. So first thing I want to tell you is we won't be able to answer this as fully as you would love. So please go visit our website. There are toolkits there that have different titles around them, because this touches down on the self-disclosure conversation too. And I think it's important for people before they ask for an accommodation to understand what they should and shouldn't say in that self-disclosure. Your employer doesn't have a right to know your specific diagnosis, and that's just too much information. They do have a right to know that you are requesting an accommodation due to a health condition, and they may ask you to provide some backup from your physician to that regard. The other thing is that the employer does not have to say yes to the accommodation. Again, every situation is different, and it may be an undue hardship for a small employer to accommodate you, or they may offer you, well, we can do a job reassignment, but you may now not necessarily want that because it might be, you know, at a lesser salary or hours you don't want to work anyway. So this is kind of a dance that has to happen. And I think the best way of approaching it is to understand that your employer probably doesn't want to lose you, and that they probably would rather figure out a way to accommodate, so long as they can figure out how to make that beneficial to the continuing work of the business. I think it's also important to be prepared for those disclosure conversations, be preparing ahead of time, so that you have a conversation that's centered only on what your needs are. Barton, have you got something you want to add?
Yeah, the other thing that I would add, personal experience is the more you can frame the request as being a benefit to your performance and the performance of your job, the more very often the more open and willing the employer becomes in working with you to find a way to meet those needs.
Yes,
Yeah.
Barton, I agree.
Absolutely.
We also have a comment in the chat box that someone's reporting knowing someone who was pregnant and working at a retail situation, and at some point they were told they should not be climbing on the ladder to stock shelves, and so unfortunately they lost their position, I guess presuming that they couldn't do the essential functions of the job. So the question is, should this person have asked for a temporary reassignment to other duties?
Well, and I think so. So this individual, obviously for a limited period of time during the pregnancy, right, was limited in their ability to perform what appeared to be an essential function of that position. But yes, that would have been absolutely appropriate to reassign that individual to other tasks during the length of the pregnancy. So yeah, there's, you know, again, employers don't get it right every time. I'm going to say that. But it's also important, and that's why we're having these webinars, is that it's important to do some self-advocacy for, you know, and have an understanding of what your needs are as an individual, particularly, an individual with a disability, as Pat said, when is it appropriate to disclose? How much do I disclose? And have those interactive conversations when appropriate. Are there other questions? I'm looking at item number 3 here. Again, any success stories that you'd like to share today? I think those are often opportunities for us to listen and learn from each other on things that have worked well. When I think about some of the work that I've been engaged in, we've had opportunities where I've worked with employers where we've had employees have traumatic brain injuries, and you don't know, because looking at the individual, you wouldn't know. It's non-visible, and we've talked about that before as well, right? There's 75% of people with disabilities had non-visible disabilities. So when we think about the accommodations that are needed, sometimes that doesn't come up until there is a performance issue. And that's, in this case, that's what happened. But boy, we engaged with this individual, and she was so relieved once we started the conversation. We engaged with her. She actually had a vocational counselor. We included them in the conversation as well, and identified strategies as simple as Post-it notes that she did have a very complex position and had a number of different steps that she was required to do, and involved spreadsheets and other things. But a simple use of a series of Post-it notes in different colors that meant different things, and prioritizing, helping her get organized, made a tremendous difference, because the impact she had due to her TBI was short-term memory loss. And so that was very, and organization was really important for her. So again, just having the awareness, I think that's probably the biggest part. And opening up those conversations, and then exploring options with valued partners that can help you identify those accommodation needs.
Mm-hmm. And Beth, we also have a comment about an individual who had to change jobs because the first manager was very accommodating of her needs as a person with disabilities. But when a new manager came in, they were not so understanding. And so it ended up forcing her out of the position. That said, I think the moral of that story is you have to communicate. You have to build relationships with managers and let them know what your needs are, and let them know that you add value to the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is really, really key. And it's not always easy, right? It's not always easy. And so it is something that that you get better and more confident over time. And on the flip side of that, Disability in North Carolina exists to really help employers get more confident and as they contribute to the conversation. So it is, as Barton said earlier, it is a two-way conversation. And that line of communication is really, really critical to the success of the employment opportunities that are there, but also the retention of the talent that people with disabilities bring to the workplace. Great.
And
so
someone has posted a comment about requesting a slight change in schedule to be able to leave a little earlier in the evening to catch the bus home, and the employer was very open to that, and as a result, the individual continues to be employed there.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a very, very simple request and an accommodation. So absolutely. Great. Are there others, Pat? Are we?
I'm checking the box right now. I'm not seeing any others immediately.
Great.
What I can say is that, we've had a great time. This has been a wonderful experience, and we would like to stay in touch with you. So we will be sending you a survey at the end of this presentation today, and we hope that you will take just a few minutes to answer the survey questions. And then I'm going to turn it over to you, Beth, so that you can talk about the fall conference that's coming up.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, so with that, we are going to wrap up today, but we do want to remind you that there are resources available to you at di-nc.org. That's our website. That's also where all 4 of the webinars that you've participated in over the last weeks here in August will be posted. So check those out. We should have those up by September 1st. So be on the lookout for those. As Pat said, we have an upcoming event happening on October 6th. We invite you to, registration will open September 1st, and we are excited to be in person again for our fall conference. So that will be at Train Technologies. It will be our host company. They are located in Davidson, North Carolina, so it will be on their campus. And looking forward to celebrating our 10th anniversary. It's been 10 years driving disability inclusion in North Carolina. So we want to invite you to participate in that event, where we'll continue the conversation around best practices among employers that are ranked among best places to work for disability inclusion here in North Carolina. So we look forward to seeing you there. And with that, I'm going to wish you a great rest of your day. And again, a huge thanks to the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities for the opportunity to bring you this webinar today and the series of employer virtual forum trainings. Thanks so much.